A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next.
During the first Republican primary debate, I was very surprised to see that you were the only candidate that raised their hand when asked if you think the U.S. should stop sending money to Ukraine. And I was wondering, do you hold the same belief when it comes to us sending aid to Israel due to the recent unfolding events in the Middle East?
It's a great question, Sarah. So I do apply similar standards across the board. One of those standards is we keep our pre-existing commitments. So we give a $3 to $3.8 billion aid to Israel that we are committed. We've made that commitment. It was a 10-year commitment before. And what I've said is that we would keep that commitment intact until the day that Israel tells us that they're ready for us to cut that off. Until then, we stand by our prior commitments. However, I'm against any further specific military support of this war. I support, as I said in the earlier case, the diplomatic cover that Israel needs to be able to defend itself. But I don't think it's in either Israel's interest or our interest for the U.S. to get involved in another protracted conflict in the Middle East. An older generation of Republicans, Dick Cheney and George Bush, sent our sons and daughters, people my age, to die in places like Iraq and Afghanistan that didn't serve the American interest. $33 trillion national debt today, $7 trillion of that is due to those two wars alone. So I want to be very careful not to make those mistakes of getting the U.S. itself, our sons and daughters, involved in another prolonged war in the Middle East, at the same time diplomatically standing for Israel's right to defend itself and rooting for and standing for the IDF's ability to get its job done. So in that sense, I am consistent. America first means something to me.
All right, guys, so the jig is up, okay? The writing is on the wall when it comes to Ukraine, okay? The toy that the U.S. government has essentially now thrown away because they have a new war toy in Israel, right? That is where most of our focus is at with what is going on over there in Ukraine. Again, it seems that we really don't want to play with them anymore, right? And that has led to headlines like this from the mainstream liberal media claiming that U.S. European officials breached topic of peace negotiation with Ukraine, sources say. Now, what's fascinating about this story, okay, is that it comes at the same time in which Ukraine is basically saying that they're ruling out secret peace talks with Russia and that the Kremlin must leave Ukraine for peace deal to work. However, you have the American media, even outlets like CNN, that are now admitting the quiet part out loud in direct contradiction with the Biden administration and military officials about the actual state of the war and whether or not Ukraine is actually winning. Take a look.
After months of a counteroffensive to wrest territory from Russia, new reporting from Time magazine reveals that while Ukrainian President Zelensky is still deeply committed to the fight, some of his advisors are worried. One of Zelensky's aides telling Time he deludes himself. We're out of options. We're not winning. But try telling him that. And that sobering assessment extends beyond the civilian government. Ukraine's commander-in-chief for the armed forces saying this to The Economist. Just like in the First World War, we have reached the level of technology that puts us into a stalemate. There will likely be no deep and beautiful breakthrough. A stalemate which was not the characterization over the last several months.
They've already acknowledged that they're not going as fast as they would like. That said, they are moving. It's not a stalemate. They're not just frozen. The Ukrainians are moving.
We do not assess that the conflict is a stalemate. We are seeing it continue to take territory on a methodical, systematic basis.
We've seen good progress in the counteroffensive, which is very heartening. We want to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs not only to succeed in the counteroffensive, but has what it needs for the long term.
And the reality on the battlefield? Well, we can show you. Those silver slivers of yellow are Ukraine's counteroffensive gains, and it really isn't a whole lot. Now, the ground in Ukraine is hardening now for another long winter, and the fight in the United States over how much aid to give it is getting more intense. Congress has authorized roughly $113 billion so far, but polls suggest that the American people's willingness to support Ukraine is waning. The yellow line here shows the share of Americans who say that the U.S. is doing too much to help Ukraine. And now it's at 41%, up from 29% in June. And that's raising some tough questions for the Biden administration and for both parties in Congress.
Yeah, so that is CNN saying the quiet part out loud, confirming that we've basically been lied to for the past 6-7 months about the actual progress of Ukraine pushing back Russia in this war. Essentially, CNN is saying it's a stalemate. If CNN is saying it's a stalemate, then that's probably the best case scenario, okay? Because you have some outlets, like this French outlet, claiming that Ukraine is actually losing, right? They're saying, you know, from some sources on the ground, right? Quote, I've been saying that for some time now already, step by step, we're losing the war. The serviceman who uses the call sign Mudry told AFP. Quote, the longer this static war continues, the worse it is for us, he said in the phone interview. Yeah. So again, what you have here is people admitting that this is a stalemate, okay? And they are basically using the same quote here that CNN is using, okay? And this is a departure from the narrative that we've been told for the last 5 or 6 months that no, we have to continue to spend billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars fighting this war. Again, this war has cost the American people $900 per household, according to the Heritage Foundation. We have to continue sending taxpayer dollars overseas because they're winning, right? They're successfully driving the Russians out, right? Even though that was not the case. But despite all this, neocon warhawks like Lindsey Graham believe that Ukraine and continuing to fund Ukraine is a good investment. Also, he admits that he actually doesn't really want to have pay-fors when it comes to funding and financing these wars overseas. Take a look.
Graham, there is a new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and he is now saying he wants to pay for Israel aid by slashing funding for the IRS. Senator Schumer, your colleague, says that's not a serious proposal. Senator McConnell has also said that he doesn't think that that's a good idea. So do you side with the top Democrat in the Senate or the top Republican in the House?
I side with Israel, and I want to get them as much money as they need as quick as they can get it. So to the House. I understand we need to start paying for things around here. I get that. But this is truly an emergency, and I don't think we've ever offset an emergency aid before. When we have a disaster, when there's a hurricane that hits South Carolina, we don't have pay-fors because it's an emergency. What I don't want to happen is that the support for Israel become partisan, right? I think there's probably 400 votes in the House to support Israel. Now, when you start putting things like pay-fors on the table, then you break that coalition apart.
So
That's what I worry about.
So you're saying Speaker Johnson is wrong?
Well, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying the reality is that when it gets to the Senate, it's not going to go forward the way it's constructed. We just don't have 60 votes for this. So rather than focusing on having pay-fors that Republicans like and Democrats don't, why don't we agree with the idea that all of us need to support helping Israel now? He can do whatever he wants to in the House, but when it comes to the Senate, I promise you there are not 60 votes for this.
Do you believe that Ukraine aid and Israel aid should remain together?
Personally, I do.
And do you think that that will ultimately happen?
I think it will in the Senate. You know, if Putin gets away with invading Ukraine, there goes Taiwan. Putin hosted Hamas, I think, yesterday in Moscow. So all this is really interconnected to me.
Why don't your colleagues understand that?
Well, listen, because I say it doesn't mean, I'm just telling you what I think. There's a lot of people believe that Ukraine's not a good investment. I'm not one of them. There's a lot of people believe you can let Putin get away with invading Ukraine, it won't matter. I'm just not one of them. There's a lot of people want to vote on it separately, but I don't. Let me tell you why. It's in America's national security interest to get this right. We need to secure our border. We need to help Ukraine. We need to stand with our friends in Israel. We should all do it together, because if we don't get all three right, we're in trouble. If we don't secure a border, we're in trouble. If we let Putin get away with invading Ukraine, we're in trouble. And God knows if we don't help Israel, they're in trouble.
All right, I want to turn now.
Wow, incredible stuff, right? Absolutely incredible stuff coming out of Lindsey Graham's mouth, right? I'm never surprised by what this guy says, okay? Because he just says the quiet part out loud about what all the neocons think, okay? So I want you guys to understand this guy's argument here. He's saying, well, some people say that investing in Ukraine is not a good investment. But I'm not one of those people. So Lindsey Graham thinks that spending $100 billion to fight a war that essentially is a stalemate, right, in which Ukraine has not made any progress, okay? You're not pushing back the Russians like you claimed that you were doing. You basically lied to us. That is a good investment. Again, that's why these politicians can't tell us what the end goal is for Ukraine. What they're actually doing, what is happening here, guys, is that you have Ukrainian lives being sacrificed for American defense contractors to get rich, and for other special interests as well, too, in that country to get rich. That's what's happening. That's 100% what's happening. Because, again, the politicians get kickbacks from the defense contractors, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, the Northrop Grumman's. Like, all these, they're getting rich, right? And the people that are suffering the most are the innocent Ukrainians, the civilians, the soldiers that are being sent to fight a war that they haven't made any progress in regards to actually winning. But then again, you got people like Vivek Ramaswamy who come out here and basically advocate for a sensible solution, which is to say, look, let's negotiate peace, right, to try to end this thing, because it looks like Russia has basically grabbed these territories. Let's try to negotiate peace so that the war can end and we can stop spending money on this and we can focus on China. He's called he's called a foreign policy novice. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy, according to neocons like Nikki Haley, who my nickname for her is Curry Bush Jr., right? Dick Cheney with a wig, okay? Who nowadays, if you listen to her talk, it seems like she's more interested in being president or prime minister of Israel than the United States, okay? If you hear this woman talk, this woman, she is bloodthirsty, right? And what is a shame is that this woman is gaining momentum in the Republican Party, the Republican primary, purely off the fact that she wants war, and more war. What's actually fascinating about the conservatives in the Republican Party is that when it came to the war in Ukraine, right, everybody could see through the propaganda for the mainstream liberal media. But when it comes to Israel, all of a sudden, everybody's buying into the propaganda from the mainstream liberal media. Fox News has become Tel Aviv Central, right? And, it's just fascinating how there's such a difference, right? It's like, well, we don't trust the media when it comes to the warmongering in Ukraine, right? But we 100% trust the media when it comes to the warmongering for the Israel situation. It's pretty fascinating stuff. I'm just saying. I think that the media, when it comes to any of these wars, we should question the media in the narrative that they're pushing, especially when these politicians come out here and start all singing the same tune, ready to fund the next war. But again, there's a holdup that's happening in Congress because of the Speaker of the House situation, right, with the Republicans, in which you had Kevin McCarthy, who was removed, right? And that basically stopped all of the money being sent overseas. And lo and behold, we actually have some good progress, right, in regards to having peace in Ukraine, because we've stopped sending money over there. And that's why you're seeing this news right here. Now, right now, you have Speaker Mike Johnson, who is saying, look, we're not going to send money to Israel unless it's paid for, right? We have to cut spending somewhere else in order to pay for this before we send money over there. Now, again, Lindsey Graham, who claims to be a fiscal conservative, right? He doesn't think that these wars should be paid for, right? This is an emergency, okay? So therefore, we shouldn't pay for it. He's telling you out loud. And that is why we never do anything about the debt, right? This is why we can't stop spending, because every time there's an emergency, we always have to make an exception. And the exception has become the rule when it comes to spending. Never pay for anything, push it down the road. And that's why nothing ever gets done in regards to the debt, right? Or the deficit problem, because the politicians always find reasons to not pay for what we spend, right? And that is a problem, okay? So again, what you see happening here, right? And I don't think this is a coincidence. The money stops flowing to Ukraine. All of a sudden, U.S. and Europe, now we want to talk about peace because we don't know if we're going to be able to keep sending you money, because the public is not necessarily getting on board with this. So let's read here. U.S. and European officials have begun quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might entail to end the war, according to one current senior U.S. official and one former U.S. Senior official familiar with the discussions. The conversations have included very broad outlines of what Ukraine might need to give up to reach a deal, the official said. Some of the talks, which officials described as delicate, took place last month during a meeting of representatives from more than 50 nations supporting Ukraine, including NATO members, known as the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the official said. Yeah, so again, Vivek Ramaswamy, when he basically was proposing the same thing, right? Oh, Ukraine is going to have to give up something in order to get peace. Oh, he was smeared. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy. Just for a few months later, this is the exact same foreign policy that everybody is pursuing because they know that the writing's on the wall. Again, it's amazing. This guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, who was right, he's declining in the polls. Warmonger, warhawk, Nikki Haley is going up. Again, that's the current state of the Republican Party. It's sad, right? It really is. That the good ones that come around, they can't get any momentum, right? But the warhawks, they get all the momentum in the world. It's sad stuff. It really pisses me off what's happening with this whole Nikki Haley thing. The discussions are an acknowledgement of the dynamics militarily on the ground in Ukraine and politically in the U.S. and Europe, officials said. They began amid concerns among U.S. and European officials that the war has reached a stalemate about the ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine, officials said. Biden administration officials also are worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply, officials said. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of President Vladimir Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. Yeah, again, were the people that were questioning the war not saying this the whole time? They were like, look, Russia is just going to chill, right? They're going to chill and they're just going to outlast whatever forces that Ukraine has. We can keep funding it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Ukraine has an unlimited amount of people that can die in order to continue to fight Russia. So again, that's what's happening here, right? You have our politicians that are they want to fund death, okay, in destruction, knowing that Russia can just wait it out, right? They can just wait it out. And that's what's happening. But again, if you said that out loud on the debate stage, you were smeared, right? You were smeared as knowing nothing about foreign policy. Amazing. And there's unease in the U.S. government with how much less public attention the war in Ukraine has garnered since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly a month ago, the official said. Officials fear that shift could make securing additional aid to Kyiv more difficult. Of course, because the jig is up, right? We want peace, right? That's what we want. We want peace. Some U.S. military officials have probably began using the term, quote, stalemate to describe the current battle in Ukraine, with some saying it may come down to which side can maintain a military force the longest. Neither side is making strides on the battlefield, which some U.S. officials now describe as a war of inches. Officials also have privately said Ukraine likely only has until the end of the year or shortly thereafter before more urgent discussions about peace negotiations should begin. U.S. officials have shared their views on such a timeline with European allies, officials said. Yeah, so again, these people, they want to send hundreds of billions of more dollars to Ukraine to essentially have a stalemate. That's what they want, right? When they can just negotiate peace right now end it, save Ukrainian lives, right? End this war, and we can focus on other issues, right? Like, I don't know, the border, right? You know, other things that actually matter to the American people. But anyways, this is what the mainstream liberal media is reporting, guys, which tells you that the tide is turning, that the narrative has been broken, okay? And that, you know, the public support is just not there. Like, for example, a Gallup poll released this week shows decreasing support for sending additional aid to Ukraine, with 41% of Americans saying the U.S. is doing too much to help Kyiv. That is a significant change from just 3 months ago, when 24% of Americans said they felt that way. The poll also found that 33% of Americans think the U.S. is doing the right amount for Ukraine, while 25% said the U.S. is not doing enough. Well, that's a shame, right? 25% of this country, 1 out of 4 people feel that $100 billion is not enough. You're out of your mind, right? I mean, again, I want peace. I don't want people to continue to lose their lives needlessly when we can have peace, when we can negotiate peace. And it seems like that's what's going to end up happening, right? That's what's going to end up happening. So, hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.